let's talk about composition basics. In this course, as we generate video, we're all communicating in a visual language. As in any language, the more words you know, the more effectively you can communicate. In visual language, the elements of composition are our vocabulary. How we arrange elements within the frame, and even the frame itself, are powerful tools to help us communicate effectively. A lot of these are going to be common sense for you, and it'll be review for you. That's okay. Let's go through them. These are the basic elements of composition. Contrast. Contrast is one of our biggest tools, just the relationship between light and dark. More contrast means brighter highlights and darker shadows. Low contrast means brighter shadows and darker highlights. These images here have very, very strong contrasts with strong highlights, strong shadows, and very few actual gray tones. These are very high contrast images. These are very low contrast images. This one here on the right has a moment of higher contrast that works very successfully, and we'll get into that in a second. These are neutral contrast images, very slow gradations from deep, deep shadows all the way to bright, bright highlights, and every tone represented in between. And contrast obviously isn't just limited to black and white images or video, but it's just easier to see exactly what we're talking about when we talk about contrast, when we're just limiting ourselves to grayscale images. Here are some basic considerations when it comes to color. We have contrasting complementary colors, colors that are on the opposite side of the color wheel to each other. So in this case, blue and yellow. We have analogous colors, colors that are much closer to each other on the color wheel. And in this case is blue and this kind of purplish pink. And then we can push that so far that the colors are basically the same. Like these analogous colors are nearly the same color. This like a deep, deep orange and this kind of yellowed red, basically both orange. Texture. Texture is a huge element of composition. Our eyes like to see, and texture is a great way to give them a lot to look at. Pattern is another great element of composition. Our eyes and our brains get excited when we recognize pattern and we start to understand and build an expectation for what can proceed beyond the edges of the image. And then if we complexify the idea of pattern, we get to repetition of form or repetition of line. This image is utilizing color contrast and just general contrast really, really well. Leading line. You can use actual lines or implied lines to direct the viewer's eyes. In this case, this is being used to emphasize depth. Sometimes this is called psychic line, as it's basically mind controlling the viewer. But in this case, all these pipes are guiding us down to the subject here in the middle. Again, like the low contrast image that had like the silhouetted figure in the distance, this is successful for some reason, not exactly just the leading line, but the leading line is obviously being helpful here. Here's a great example of leading line. We follow the railing of the stairs down to the moving subject. Eye room looking space is another form of leading line, and you can utilize the space that a subject or a character is looking into, whether you want to give the composition more balance or less balance, right? Like if this was framed so the edge of the frame was here, that would introduce much more compositional stress than here. It feels more compositionally balanced, like we have a lot of space to see what she's looking into. Read direction. This has to do with language and how the read direction of your very first, of the language you learned to read, of the very first language you learned to read. So if you learn to read from left to right, like in English, then you will subconsciously enter an image on the left-hand side and pan across that image until you get to the right-hand side. If you learn to read in a language that goes the other direction, then you'll enter the frame on the other side and move across. And so it's a really powerful tool to direct a viewer's eye through a frame. And then in this case, I feel like since I learned to read English first, I enter the frame here on the left. I scan across almost instantly see Spider-Man back here, and then ultimately I arrive up here on this subject here, and I follow their eye line back over to the left-hand side of the frame. So this makes a very successful kind of circular motion for me as I spend time in this frame. This is a great example of an image or a framing that is not utilizing a few of these very well. In this case, the looking space is very, very cramped. Like we have all this space over here that's empty and not being utilized. However, the leading line pulls the viewer's eye right off the subject and into the distance. Like we follow this, which is reinforced by my read direction, right? I start here, I encounter the subject, and I can either vibrate in this kind of cramped space on the left-hand side of the frame, or I can slide right off of the image and right off the subject off into the background. So yeah, this is not a very successful composition. Rule of thirds. I'm sure many of you have heard about the rule of thirds. The idea is in composition, if you want to make a balanced image, the ultimate balanced image would just be centered or symmetrical. But if you want to make a more engaging balanced image, then you could place the subject on one of these third lines, and then the weight of the other 2/3 of the image balance the significance and weight of the subject that is on the 1/3 of the image. Obviously, rule of thirds is not a rule. It's just a device that you can utilize in composing an image. Depth. Depth is helpful for me, and I encourage you to consider depth in the rule of thirds again, right? So the rule of thirds are moving across and vertically through the frame. But if you think of the rule of thirds applied to depth, then you end up with a foreground, midground, and background. And that really helps you consider like, okay, yeah, like what's going on in my foreground, what's going on in my middle ground, and what's going on in my background. And now you're considering the frame not just in a 2D sense, but in a 3-dimensional space. And again, your subject doesn't have to be in the foreground, and you can deal with focus shifting through all 3 of those planes. Symmetry. Symmetry is a huge basic element of composition. In this case, like a literal mirror is being used. If there's any Wes Anderson fans, Wes Anderson is sort of a master at using symmetry versus asymmetry versus centered framing. This image is not necessarily symmetrical in the sense that this image is, but there's a lot of visual symmetry or weight symmetry going on here with like colors balancing each other across the frame, the yellow suitcase versus the yellow handkerchief, the pink dress versus like the pinky skin, and then obviously like the general center weightedness of the composition here. Framing is a huge thing. Like where you decide to place the cropping edge of the frame is really powerful and really important. Cutting through joints or chopping off body parts, like framing someone's head out or their legs out or something, produces really dynamic and oftentimes unsettling frames. And of course, framing also dispels the myth of the photographic truth, right? Like just where you wrap a frame around something, what you decide to include versus what you decide to exclude already starts distorting how reality is being presented. Frame within a frame is a fantastic basic element of composition. And not only do we have this outside frame here, right, of the actual image, but this subject is being framed again with this pocket of shadow here that he contrasts very successfully with. And again, with this harsh kind of, it's a pole, but yeah, like this is like a rigid architectural feature, right, that is like confirming the frame within a frame. Negative space. Negative space is a fantastic basic element of composition where you balance the weight of a significant subject in a more dynamic way by offsetting it with an expanse of nothingness, right? And this is a very successful version of that. This frame's got a lot of things working for it, right? There's a good example of negative space, good example of the rule of thirds, good example of leading line, and definitely a good example of contrast. All right, there's 3 things that attract the human eye more than anything. The brightest point of any composition, the area of highest contrast, and any part of the human form, right? I like to say human form or fragment of. Because if there's like a severed hand in the corner of a frame, you betcha that's going to be the first thing you see. So if we look back at this, right, this has got a lot going on for it. This is definitely an area of high contrast. It's the human form. And I'd say the brightest part of the frame is kind of spread like throughout. And if we spin back to this one image here, this is also like, this is, I guess you could say these little circles here are very bright as well, but I would say this is the largest, brightest part of the frame. And we've got the human form, and this is an area of high contrast. So this is an example of like a very successful composition. And again, like these are suggestions for building a balanced composition. You can also use all these things to build an unbalanced or compositionally stressful image. It's all about what supports your concept or your narrative.